Works by Srila Prabhupada.
Hey.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So we continue these somewhat inscrutable, not inscrutable, but technical verses on uh, a, a very technical bhakti yoga process, which we no longer do today. Which also indicates what Krishna says. Krishna says in the Gita, Yogi Nama Pi Sarvesham, the end of chapter 6, that of all yogis, Yogi Nama Pi Sarvesham, indeed of all yogis, Madgatena Antaratmana, literally one whose inner self, Antaratma. Atma means the self, and Antar is where we get the word internal. So one whose inner self, Antaratmana, Yoginam pi sarvesham, Yoginam api sarvesham. Then, what did I just say? My God, I can't believe I forgot that verse. Yoginam api sarvesham. Madgatena, antaratmana. So Madgatena refers to the antaratma. So with the inner self, it's the instrumental form, with the inner self, antaratmana, which is Madgatena, which has gone to me. Madgata, gone to me. And so in Sanskrit, the word gone is used, it's a common verb that's used somewhat idiomatically. It doesn't simply mean literally going from point A to point B. It can mean dedicating yourself to, like really going to something. It's just like, for example, in English, we say to get into something. So it doesn't mean if you get into, let's say, baseball, it doesn't mean literally you crush your body so small you can get inside an American baseball. It's just an expression to get into something. And so Sanskrit also has lots of, just like any language, idiomatic expressions that, can't be taken in a sort of blindly literal sense. So gata, gone, is often used in Sanskrit in that sense, like to get into something or to be into something. And so Madgatena Antaratmana, so literally one whose inner self has gotten into me or is dedicated to me. So yogi nama pi sarvesham, indeed of all yogis, Madgatena Antaratmana, Shadhavan Bhajate Jomam. So one who worships me, Bhajate, one who worships me, Shadhavan, really believing in it. In other words, we always say, just chant Hare Krishna. Can you say Hare Krishna? But actually, to really achieve Krishna consciousness, you have to really believe in what you're doing. You have to trust what you're doing. In fact, the word Shraddha, which is really a combination of two words, dha means to place, and it's actually cognate with the English suffix dom, dum, like kingdom, freedom. So that suffix in England, anyway, we could know the technical details. So, and shrud means, it can mean the heart or trust. So it really means to place your trust in something. It's not just like, if you just mean, like in English or other languages, the word faith often means like, do you believe in God? Do you believe in God? Yes, I have faith. I believe in God. So simply to believe that God exists is another word in Sanskrit. That's the word astikya from the Sanskrit word asti. Asti means he is, she is, and of course, asti comes through the Latin, it's the Greek, Latin, I think, Latin est, est, which is still there in French, although they don't pronounce any of the consonants. They say ile, they pronounce it a, but it's actually, if you pronounce it phonetically, which is how it used to be pronounced before they kind of got impatient with that, it's it's actually est, which is just Latin. So the Latin est, which is still German ist, and Spanish ace, and Portuguese. Actually, Portuguese followed the French, but forget that. So it was getting too much information. And so it means is. So from the word asti in Sanskrit, he, she, or it is, you get the word astikya, which is one of the qualities of Brahmana. Jnana vijnanam astikyam. So astikyam literally means believing that God exists. So faith in the sense of, yes, I believe in God, in the sense of I believe that God exists, is just astikya. And so the word Shraddha is more than that, which I think is important to explain. In fact, there's a formal definition of the word Shraddha in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And by formal definition, I mean it actually says by this word, it gives like a formal definition in this Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is that Shraddha Shabde, which is means by the word Shraddha. Shabda can mean word. So by the word Shraddha, the Vishwasa Kahe, one means Vishwasa, which is trust, trust somebody. So Shraddha Shabde Vishwasa Kahe, and trust is, that trust is a Sudridha Nischay, a very firm conviction. Sudridha means very firm, a very literal, I'm giving you a very literal translation, a very firm conviction that Krishna Bhakti Koile, by rendering, by performing bhakti, devotion to Krishna, sarva karma krita hoy, every action will be done, every duty will be done. So, for example, we're worried about our personal life, relationships, we're worried about our career, we're worried about our health. And so, therefore, we do different things to try to be healthy. We do things to try to find or establish or preserve meaningful relationships. We do things to try to keep ourselves financially with our head above the water, and so on. So if you think about it, uh, there's so many activities that we do, and yet this verse says, Krishna Bhakti Koile. If we very sincerely offer devotional service to Krishna, all of our duties will be done. Sarva karma krita. Krita means done. Sarva karma krita will be done. And so it doesn't mean that we go Python. You know that story in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam where there's a type of yoga where you trust God by just literally just lying down somewhere on the road like a python, and just, which is said the python just lies there with its mouth open, and some, let's say not very intellectual creature kind of walks into the python's mouth, and then so the idea that you just sort of sit there or lie there and just trust that God will send you something. So that's not what we're talking about here. It's not a process for this age, although you would know it looking at some devotees. So, so we're active. We actually do things. We endeavor, but we're not all stressed out in our endeavors because we know that Krishna will ultimately save us if we are serving Krishna nicely. Because it's Shraddha that we are actually rendering devotional service. We're serving Krishna with devotion. It's not that we can be lazy and think that, it's okay to be lazy and Krishna will take care of me. Krishna is not particularly responsive to lazy people. So, so that's what it means. That's what bhakti means. So, Hare Krishna.
Panchakampa.
Hey, please accept my desire tree. Panchakampa.
That's a good one. I like that.
Where's that?
Fine.
So therefore, going back to this verse where Krishna says, Yogi Nama Pi Sarve Sham, indeed of all spirit, really it means spiritual practitioners there. Doesn't mean people down at your local yoga studio. So of all spiritual practitioners, Madgatena Antaratmana, one whose inner self literally has gone to me, it resides in me. Shadhavan, and that was the word. Shraddha, Van, of course, means one who possesses. One who possesses Shraddha. In other words, one who's really put their heart in Krishna, one who really trusts Krishna. Not lazy, not inactive, not foolish, but working hard for Prabhupada and Prabhupada's mission, but trusting that Krishna will take care of me. Everything will be done by Krishna. So Shadhavan Bhajate Joman, one who worships me, Same Yukta Tamo Mataha. Mataha here means considered. It's from the verb man, to think, like manas, the mind. And so literally something that has been thought is mata, or the mind is mati. Just like when someone was glorifying Lord Chaitanya, he just said, Krishna mati rastu. Let your mati, let your mind be in Krishna. Let your thoughts be in Krishna. And so it's translated as the best yogi, but what does Krishna literally say? The Sanskrit word yoga comes from the root yuj, which means to link, to connect, which we still have in many words in English, like the word yoke, to yoke two things, to connect two things. Yoke is just yoga. They just changed one consonant. Actually, it's in the same row. If you look at the Sanskrit alphabet, they just made it from a hard guttural to a soft guttural. But anyway, that's too much for you. So, but it's actually, yoga in English became yoke, to connect two things, like to yoke two things together. And so from that same root, huge, and of course the root is huge, from which we have words like conjugal, which means intimate connection, and so on, and other words also. So as I always say, English is just full of Sanskrit. It's just all over the place. So, and that's why when they first discovered Sanskrit, Sir William Jones, in one of the first leaders of the Asian Oriental Society, so in the 1790s, he gave a very famous talk in which he declared that sort of like, Sanskrit and English are intimately connected, because if you think about it, one of the one of the main indicators in European culture at the time that someone was high class or low class was how their language, how they spoke. I mean, think My Fair Lady. Your social class, to some extent, is still that way, isn't it? And we still do it in America for all this, classless, dreaming. Actually, the way someone speaks sort of marks them as belonging to a certain cultural level. And so, in fact, I mean, still today, I mean, one of the main things comedians do is talk like a low class person for laughs, isn't it? And so anyway, um, so the root huge is the root. Sanskrit is sort of Sanskrit grammar. As I've often said, the modern academic discipline of linguistics was created by the discovery of Sanskrit grammar. The Sanskrit alphabet, if you look at the alphabet at the back of our books, it's actually a scientific phonetic chart. It's phonology. It's not just it's not like English. A, B, C. A is a literally it's a just a diphthong. The vowel A. B is a soft voiced labial consonant. Anyway, if you look at the Sanskrit, this is easy way. Look at the Sanskrit alphabet, the alphabet chart at the back of our books, and then find all the letters of the English alphabet, and you'll see it jumps all over the place because it's just completely arbitrary. Whereas the Sanskrit alphabet is completely scientific. So anyway, in that scientific language or analysis of language, it's an organic view, literally in the sense that words are seen as growing out of roots. So you have roots, stems, and then complete words. Anyway, it's completely scientific. That's why the English were kind of inspired and appalled to find out that they were the what's her name, Eliza Doolittle's from My Fair Lady. They were the ones that couldn't speak properly, whereas in India they had this much more sophisticated language, and they were like bumpkins with English, which was and so it was actually the discovery of that in India there was a very ancient and completely scientific language spawned a whole new academic field called Indo-European Studies. So, but anyway, in Sanskrit, the root for the word yoga is huge, like conjugal. And so if you want to say connected, like connect, you, then connected, that's yukta. So if you look in the Bible, I explain this all in the guide to the Gita. The word yukta is found throughout the Gita because the Gita is always talking about yoga, spiritual practice, and it's always talking about people who actually are strong in the practice. Like a person who's actually strong in their spiritual practice will have these characteristics, will behave in this way. And so whenever it's talking about someone who is connected, who is fixed in spiritual practice, it's the word yukta. And so tama here is not tamas. Tamas with an S at the end or an O sometimes means darkness, like tamoguna. Hello, tamoguna, my old friend. I've come to sink into you again. Anyway, so that's tamas, but the word tama means most. Like so, yukta tama means the most connected, the most linked. And since the whole word yoga means to link, the most linked means the most advanced in yoga, the one who has the strongest connection to the absolute truth. And that's what Krishna says. Sa me, that person to me, yukta tama, has the strongest connection. Mataha. And so when Krishna says that's the way it's considered, that's the way it's thought of, it means that's the way it is. So sometimes in Gita, when you see iti me mati, thus my mati, and so Prabhupada, thus my opinion. And so people say, why is Krishna just good? Well, it's just being polite. It's like if the judge says to you, I would advise you to sit down right now. So if the judge says that, it's like, you'd better sit down. So anyway, so so the yoga system or just spiritual practice culminates in Krishna. And so here we have, so it's not, and the reason I mentioned all of this, actually, I'm going to get back to the verse here. So to your shock and amazement, I didn't forget the actual verse. And so the point here is that when we find this very technical yoga process being prescribed, something we can hardly understand and much less practice, but we get the gist of it. The common thread running through all these very technical verses is you're at point A, you've got to get to point B. And you do this by starting at the most base, the most sort of gross level of your body, like earth, and go to water and fire, and finally get to the higher senses. This is true whether you're moving your prana up through the different, what's now called, I guess, chakras in the body, a word that Krishna doesn't really use, but through these different, energy points in the body, and then just kind of launching it sort of like a NASA event where you launch your soul out through the top of your head, which is a very auspicious, you could say, cerebral perforation. Anyway, so whether it's that, bringing your life air up through the body or bringing your consciousness, it's always this upward motion. It's physically upward, going up your body, just like when you meditate on the universal form, which is described in the previous chapter. You start at the feet of the universal form, and then you gradually go upwards. You get to the smiling face of Vishnu. So here also you bring your prana. So there's this actually pervading this Vedic culture is so we can call uh, this sort of these anatomical procedures, and even symbolic. And so it's not only actually physically a real direction, like you actually bring your prana with the idea that your soul is there, because the word prana also means life in Sanskrit. You'll see many times it's translated as life or the vital breath. Vital, if you know Latin, means life, right? Like vida in Spanish, life, vita in Italian. So vital literally means containing life. And so that's why you say the vital air, it means the air which contains the soul. It's all connected. So so anyway, whether it's meditating on a universal form, where you start at the feet and gradually go up to the smiling face, whether you're lifting your own prana which contains the soul up to the top of the body, whether you are mastering the different levels, starting with the, like Krishna says, Bhumi, Apo, Analavai, earth, water, fire, air. So all these hierarchies are just, they pervade the Bhagavatam. These hierarchies, everything is hierarchical. Everything is focused on moving upward, on advancing. So in that sense, the text is very dynamic because it's always talking about moving upward, going to more subtle levels till you get to the soul. And so that's really what these chapters are about. First chapter, the Virat Rupa, this second chapter, the second canto, about your own yoga practice. But ultimately, so here's the point I wanted to make: the fact that it's being done as a form of bhakti yoga, it's not just a sort of an like adding on something like, well, originally it was just an impersonal yoga thing, but we're just sort of adding on a bhakti mood to it. No, it's originally bhakti yoga. Yoga is originally bhakti yoga, and that's what Krishna's saying here. The original yoga is bhakti yoga, and that's why Krishna's saying that the bhakti yoga is yuktatamap, is the most powerfully connected to me in yoga, because that's ultimately what yoga is. Because if you perform any kind of yoga and don't come to Krishna, you're not fully connected. It's just like, it's like you buy a computer, but somehow when they manufactured it, they forgot to or didn't adequately connect two things, and your computer doesn't work. So the whole point is that if yoga is to connect, but you don't connect to Krishna, your connection's only partial. Like maybe your computer works, but you don't get an image on your screen, which is impersonalism. It means your computer's half broken, you can type things, but there's no image. So if you're doing all this yoga and you can't see God, it's like, you need to go back to yoga school. So anyway, I wanted to explain in general terms what these chapters are doing. They're not just sort of, some of the incomprehensible chapters of the Bhagavatam that we just kind of go through quickly till we get to something we can understand and that sounds like Krishna consciousness. But it's, or just sort of don't read them. There are different difficult parts of the Bhagavatam that are not read that often by devotees in their own, casual reading. But actually, we can understand them. We can understand what's really going on and get a very good picture of what this culture was. So, any questions? Yes.
So, Charlie, I think in the Guided Gita you put it like this: no yukta, no yoga.
So I hope I did. That sounds clever. So I hope I did. I hope I did say it. Can't remember.
So you could say in Texas jargon, no hat, no link. I mean, all hat, no link. All hat, no cattle.
We have a bona fide Texan here that.
Well, it's because he's from Texas. I'm making up.
So, yes.
I just wanted to make a comment that actually the table of elements, which was made by Dmitry Mendeleev, it was actually inspired by Sanskrit. Because when he was when he was writing his book on the table of elements, it was in the University of St. Petersburg, and one of his friends was Otto von Bergnick, who was writing at that time the German Sanskrit dictionary.
Oh, that's a famous dictionary.
Yes. So he showed him like, oh yeah, look, this is the alphabet, in Sanskrit and like that. And then one night, Dimitri just had this dream in which all of the elements were in rows and columns like that, just like he had seen. And he was like, oh, like that. He woke up, immediately wrote them down, and there was just like a few of them that were not properly, but it was there, and that's how the table of elements was created.
That's very interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah, Western scholarship. You know, remember you're a kid and you played this game with the ball called Keep Away, where you have a ball and you don't let someone get the ball, keep it away from that person. En France, en fait. Anyway, it's called Keep Away. So basically, once they discovered the Indo-European truth, it was kind of like at first it was like, okay, Sanskrit's the original language or the oldest language, and then they thought, no, that's too dangerous, because actually it was just psychologically not permissible that Sanskrit be the original language, because Sanskrit was associated with India. And so here, this is when all these discussions were going on. It was, of course, during the age of full-on colonialism. And so the justification, there were basically two justifications for colonialism, none of which were kind of the real reason. The real reason was just greed. But there were sort of these intellectual, what would you say, justifications of it, which probably did matter to some people. But and so the more sort of theoretical justifications were that, first of all these people in all these countries, all of them are going to hell because they're not Christians. So we have to bring Christianity to them. And the second reason is on the logic of My Fair Lady, that your cultural level is known by yours, the way you speak, that that these people have low culture, they're barbarians, and we are civilizing them. So we are not just going there and exploiting them and enslaving them and taking all their resources to the well, but even if we are, we're basically civilizing them. We're bringing them up to proper human civilization. So we're not only saving them as human beings, we're saving their souls by making them into Christians.
Well, wasn't there also the issue that, I remember you talking about this, the debate over what was the language in the Garden of Eden, Greek or Latin, was debated, and if it was Sanskrit was older, then that means the darkies would have been the Garden of Eden, which wasn't acceptable.
Well, actually, yes, but it was also worse than that, because everyone accepted the Bible. Well, not everyone, but most people. Uh, Something in India could not be older than the Garden of Eden.
Yeah,
And they had all these chronologies. They would count, okay, how many generations were there since Adam and Eve, and what was the average lifespan? Obviously people lived much longer. What they're talking about really is the end of Dwapara Yuga, when people lived for hundreds of years, 800 years, 900. And so scholars would calculate these things so you could understand how long ago did Adam and Eve live in the Garden of Eden. And that's how old human civilization is. That's how old life on Earth is. And so, and then when you discover India, and some European scholars, including British, of course, by European I mean British also, just by Brexit, that when they start translating these things, and in the Gita itself, you talk about time spans of trillions of years in the Garden of Eden, poor Garden of Eden. And so therefore it had to be mythology. Not only and of course, some people who were Indophiles really kind of loved all this stuff, like Henry David Thoreau and Emerson, and lots of intellectuals in Europe who really, because they were just intellectually drawn to this. And but it had to be mythology. If it's mythology, then the Vedic literature can give any chronology it wants, and it's not a problem, because it's either this mythology or that mythology. So it's showing not how old things were, it's just showing the unbridled imagination of people in South Asia, that their imaginations are out of control, and they came up with these big time frames, and that's why more than and another justification for colonization, for colonizing them. Yes.
So it was fascinating hearing your description about the kind of the upward movement of Vedic culture, upward, just like the going up through the energy centers, whatnot. And so, would it be proper to say, if you juxtapose Vedic culture with material culture, where Vedic culture is the upward motion towards God, towards bhakti, and material culture is the upward motion towards the acquisition of things or knowledge without God?
Yeah, and a lot of times it's literally a downward motion to the reproductive organs.
Right.
Because if you look at our modern society, everything now is just moving in that direction. It's moving down, not up,
Mm.
because everything is, sexualized.
Right, but in terms of the ideal, like, you say like My Fair Lady culture,
Yes.
there's the upward acquisition.
Well, that goes back to Plato. I mean,
Right.
it goes back forever because the intelligence, the intelligence, the brain, the head, the eyes, that's where you see, that's where you hear. Your consciousness is centered in your brain. And of course, there's the heart thing of consciousness, we won't go into it. But, there's the whole, the brain and the senses and everything. So, anyway, so getting back to Sanskrit, uh, if there, as everyone had to agree, that there must have been an Indo-European culture, then if Sanskrit comes from India, then that's a disaster.
Mm.
Because that means that means that means the people in India who are not even actually technically Northern Indians are classified as Caucasian by their fine facial features, the hair, and all that. However, they're not white, and so that was an age when there was literally not a single place on earth that wasn't racist. I mean, racism was universal including India. They looked down on white people. So, I mean, everyone in the world was a racist, practically without exception. So, so therefore, if Sanskrit is the oldest language, then does that mean we come from India? And that was absolutely unacceptable. So it must have been that Europeans brought Sanskrit and the Veda and this culture to India, because since it was an age of just unbridled sort of racism, so it must be the case that the Europeans brought it to India. It didn't come from India to Europe, and then you get the idea of the Aryan invasion, which is once someone asked my Sanskrit professor Witzel at Harvard about it, and he just laughed and said, that's a 19th century idea. So no one takes it seriously, the Aryan invasion. But that was a way of explaining. So, and then what happened was when the Aryan invaders came into India, and of course being superior, being more intelligent, and so on, and bringing Sanskrit with them, and conquering India very easily, being a superior race, but they made one huge mistake, which ruined the project, and that is they intermarried with the dark people of South Asia.
That was their theory.
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah, that was the fatal blunder. They intermarried, and so now the Europeans coming to India to colonize it, because at one point there were French colonies like Pondicherry and other places, and of course English colony, the Portuguese were in Goa. Everyone wanted a piece of India, and so so the Europeans, by colonizing India, were actually saving India, because unlike their ancestors, they were not going to foolishly intermarry. And so by taking over the land of Vedic culture, they were returning it to its proper owners. It's like, we created Vedic culture, it belongs to us, we are the natural rulers of India. So it was kind of in their mind an airtight theory. And of course, and so that's how they dealt with the problem of India being Sanskrit being oldest language. Well, sure, Sanskrit can be as old as you want because it's our language. And the proof that it's our language is that all the European languages are so intimately connected to Sanskrit, with only three exceptions actually, which are Basque, and no one knows where in the world that came from, the language of northern Spain, and two languages which are sort of connected together, which are Finnish and Hungarian. They're still trying to figure that one out. So, but apart from that, all the European languages, are intimately connected to Sanskrit, including probably your favorite language, Albanian, and even the language of the Hittites who were in central Turkey. So this anyway, a lot of information. But so yeah, so going back to that language or the sorry the what is it, the table of periodic elements,
Yeah,
that it yeah, so they were making all these connections because once you understand that Vedic culture originally comes from us, it's just like the connections are wonderful. And then one person, famous politician, who was into this thing and said that not only did Europeans bring Vedic culture to India, but specifically the leader of those Europeans were the Germanic tribes, and hence this politician used the swastika as a symbol for his political party. That was the connection because he sort of appropriated this whole Indo-European fetish that was going on in Europe, that the connections between the languages. Another reason they liked it is because with the rise of sort of European racism, like I said, I mean everyone on the planet was a racist back then. So with the rise of European, it was like nationalism back then. It was a moral equivalent of nationalism. So with the rise of this um, colonialism and everything, um, Germany had a problem, and that is Germany had become sort of the most culturally advanced country in Europe in terms of, think of the great musicians, Beethoven and Bach, and I mean Austria is always just kind of like part of the Germanic world. Just all the Handel, Schubert. I mean all the great composers. I mean, really great music was coming from the Germanic people, and they were also the great scientists. It's a Hollywood trope. The movie where there's the mad scientist with the German accent and the glasses and everything. And so Germany was also very advanced in science and in literature. I mean, it was the richest country. It was for one thing because colonialism often didn't make a profit. So anyway, but they didn't have colonies. They didn't have colonies, and so it was like in those days that was the feather in the cap. Like to really be a great country, you had to have a world presence. You had to have a powerful presence on the world stage, which Europe didn't. Germany didn't because basically the whole process of colonizing shifted the center of power because anyway, just a little more and I'll stop. Because for thousands of years, as I put it, the economic superhighway in the Western world and even the central, the Middle East, the economic and money means power. If you have money, you buy more weapons, you hire more mercenaries, and so money is power. And so the economic superhighway was the Mediterranean, whether it's Phoenicians, going from basically what is now Lebanon, going to and founding the city of Carthage and actually challenging Rome, whether it's Rome itself, whether it's the Greeks. And so the farther east you were in the Mediterranean, the more power you had because world trade was going through the Middle East from the two great population centers in the world. One great population center was Europe and the Middle East, and even going up into sort of Russia. The other great population center was India and China. And so basically, world trade was between these two great population centers in the Middle East. They were just kind of like traders, they were just kind of like middlemen. And so, therefore, the Mediterranean, the farther east you were, and that's why the Eastern Roman Empire became much more powerful than the Western Roman Empire. And the Eastern Roman Empire survived 1,000 years, 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire didn't actually fall when it did, just the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire went on for 1,000 years because that was a more powerful, wealthy part of the empire. So what happened? Then something happened which changed everything. And that is uh, the fall of Constantinople, which was the capital for 1,000 years of the Eastern Roman Empire, and fell to this rising to the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. And so with that, with the fall of Constantinople, it totally interrupted world trade. It's just like, for example, if China just suddenly refused to, it just shut down world trade, and so it was a big crisis. And you had to go through the Ottomans. You had to pay all these taxes. So it was an economic, and therefore thereby military crisis for Europe. So the way they dealt with this, or the way some people tried to deal with it, is they thought if we can find another way to get to the east, we can restore world trade. And they thought the way to get to the east is you just sail west and go around the world. And so Columbus, this is the argument that Columbus sold to the King and Queen of Spain, that if Spain finances this, Spain will actually control world trade. And there's just one little detail they weren't aware of, the Western Hemisphere. So, yeah, a little detail. So anyway, but what they did discover is all these rich indigenous peoples, and of course, indigenous peoples they were just like a banquet. They were just there for the killing and for the raping and for the exploiting, when they had no other real existential purpose. And so then the countries who were facing the Atlantic became powerful, became very wealthy and powerful, which was, of course, England, Spain, and France. They became the great imperial powers because they're the ones that face the Atlantic. And so after thousands of years, where the Mediterranean was the commercial center for this part of the world, suddenly the commercial center, the commercial superhighway became the Atlantic Ocean. And whoever controlled access to the Atlantic Ocean controlled world power. So meanwhile, back to Germany, which was very wealthy and culturally very advanced, but it did not have a proper access to the Atlantic. They had to go past these other countries that just wouldn't let them out. And so therefore, that was the German complex. That was their problem that they were very unhappy about. And so therefore you get one of the great fools of modern history, Wilhelm II, Kaiser. But Kaiser just was German for Caesar. Like Tsar in Russia was just Russian for Caesar. And so he said that Germany had to have a Weltpolitik. Welt means world. They had to have a world policy. They had to come out on the world stage. And of course, this led to World War I and to World War II, and it was just a disaster. But anyway, before you look at the rise of Hitler, and so Germany, in order to, because everything was nationalism. Nationalism was not considered to be like this unrespectable type of, like among intellectuals now, nationalism is a bad word. Nationalism, first of all, was a leftist movement. Now it's associated with the right. It was a heavy left-wing movement. Why? Because it was in opposition to divine right monarchy. Because power, political power, military power doesn't come from God down to a few special families, royal families, but actually the seat of power in a country is the people of that country. And God actually gives the power not to a few royal families, but God actually gives the power to the people of a nation. And so nationalism was a left-wing movement which opposed divine right monarchy. And this is all tied in with the Industrial Revolution, because you get the rise of the middle class. I mean, because the middle class was making all this money. At first, the royals thought it was beneath their dignity to have factories, and therefore the middle class jumped on it. And then because they had money, they had power, they started buying political influence, and they got laws passed saying that nobles The noble class, who traditionally, whose wealth and power came from the land, could not build factories because they didn't want the competition. And so therefore you get the impoverishing of the noble. Anyway, it's all connected. But if you get to Hitler and the swastika, so Germany, one of the ways they tried to get prestige and get their world status, because they couldn't do it through colonies. They had a few little colonies, but they were trivial. So the way they did it was with the discovery of Indo-European civilization and Sanskrit, they wanted to co-opt it. And so they said, actually, it comes from the Germanic people. In fact, everywhere else in Europe, they had Indo-European departments. In Germany, they had Indo-Germanic departments. Because actually, it's the Germanic people specifically who had brought Vedic culture to India. And so Hitler was just riding that wave. And so because he was an ultra nationalist, and so Hitler, in order to get power, sort of this fool, he wanted to co-opt these Indian symbols to show that that's our, we have the greatest colony because we actually created Vedic India. Anyway, I think it's interesting to know all these things, isn't it?
There.
So there's a whole, anyway, I'll stop here, but there's a whole story behind it.
May I ask an unrelated question?
Quickly, because
Quick, yes, real quick. I've always wondered, in your estimation, what is the Vedic corollary to Satan? I know Satan, we have this understanding in Christianity of the devil, of Lucifer, of Satan.
well, first of all, it's you can talk about Kali. The fact that they have Satan shows that the sort of the philosophical, that they weren't philosophically advanced. Because it's a dualistic. It actually, one place, if you look at, for example, the greatest, the most influential philosopher of all the Middle Ages in Christianity, it was Augustine. And for 10 years before Augustine joined the Jesus movement, he was a member of the money movement, the Manichaeans, who were very heavy dualists who believed there's forces of good and forces of evil. And Augustine was believing and teaching this for 10 years before he became a Christian. And there were other the Gnostics had that kind of view. The word Gnostic, of course, comes from Sanskrit jnana. But anyway, so there were other Gnostics who tend to be dualists, believing in good and evil. And so it was the Gnostic, and I would say probably the Augustinian influence on Christianity that led them to this very heavy dualism. So if there's an infinite good, there must be an infinite evil. And so I say it's not philosophical, because if you look at the more philosophical traditions, you get Vasudeva Sarvamiti. Vasudeva is everything. Because ultimately, on a philosophical level, because it's like the science of ideas, it's just like in physical sciences, you're looking for the equation that explains all the equations, or at least the equation that explains lots of equations. So there's always this move to try to consolidate, to unify, to come to a simpler formulation of a greater truth. And so when you have scientific philosophy, you have the same movement toward consolidation, toward unification of ideas. And therefore, there can't be two great principles. There's one, which is God. And just like Arjuna says to Krishna in the Gita, Sarvam Samapnoshi, you encompass everything, Tatosi Sarvam, therefore you are everything. And so, so you find in the great philosophical religious traditions, what you find is, including philosophical traditions in Christianity, which are no longer really that prominent, you find this movement toward some type of monism. And of course, if you go too far and just distort everything, you get Shankara or the Mayavadis. And so if you have a monism which allows for variety, but still you get Ramanuja, whose philosophy is called Vishishtadvaita. So Vishishtadvaita literally is a direct synonym for Beta Veda. Because beta means difference in the sense of differentiation. Just like you have the English word divide and the word different. So, I mean, the verb bid means to divide, to separate. So, for example, Krishna, from the same root as beta, Krishna talks about the material energy as my binna prakriti, my separated prakriti, and the word binna is from the same root as beta. Or you can say bit or vidyate means something that's literally cut or separated. And so Vishishta means exactly that. It means where you have distinctions. It's not all one, you have distinctions. The word Visheshana in Sanskrit means an adjective. And an adjective is a distinguishing word. Like you say the house, which house? The big house, the small house, the white house. So adjectives separate nouns. You take nouns and then you separate them, you distinguish between them by adjectives. And the word Visheshana means an adjective. So Vishishta means distinguished, separated, separately. And so Vishishta means beta. And Advaita means Aveda. So actually Ramanuja's philosophy of Shishta Advaita, they're just direct synonyms for Veda Aveda. But still, you have this philosophical drive, and Ramanuja was certainly a great philosopher. You have this philosophical drive to ultimately unify everything. And so you have this unification, this conceptual unification, but without obliterating legitimate distinctions. So that's beta beta. Whereas in unphilosophical or in religious traditions which do not have intrinsic or original philosophies, they sort of come after the fact. It's like their theologies got formed and then they tried to philosophize it. So they're trying to philosophize ideas which are not philosophy based. And so they're stuck with this heavy dualism. You're stuck with this heavy dualism. Not only, I mean, you're stuck with polytheism, as in the Trinity doctrine. I mean, no one's going to convince me it's not polytheism. And so, and then you get an attempt in America, and England, of course, to try to eliminate this polytheism and sort of to move back toward unity, philosophical unity, and they form a church called the Unitarian Church. And so the Unitarian Church was trying to, they realized like the Trinity doctrine is not really monotheism. It's not strong monotheism. And so anyway, so I could go on, but so I think it's good if we have some idea of where we are in the Western world and why things happen.
I'm just trying to understand the
Just one last point. And that's why you get things like panpsychism, again, trying to get toward
A unity.
a unity. Or even the physicalists. They're trying to find some physical law which explains all the other physical laws. So you see, it's just the natural movement of philosophy, of analysis, to synthesize, to try to find larger and larger categories. It's just like if you're just some person that lives out in the country somewhere, let's say you live alone, you have a horse, so all you know is your horse. And then you see other people have horses, so you get the category horse. And then you see there are certain relative similarities between horses and pigs and cows, so you come up with the category mammal. And so synthesizing, categorization, more and more synthetic categories until you finally, and anyway, I go on and on, but so you get the point.
I'm trying to understand how the Christian Trinity is polytheism.
Because there are three people who are not the same person who are all God. And when more than one person is God, that's called poly. Like poly wants a polytheism. So
Of course, but we have our understanding of the Trinity, which would be the Bhagavan, Paramatma, and the Guru. I mean, couldn't it be correct?
no, because first of all, the Guru is not God, and secondly, Paramatma is Krishna. It's not a different person.
Right.
Whereas the Trinity doctrine emphasizes that it's a different person. The Father is not Augustine taught this in his multi-volume work on defending the Trinity doctrine. The Father is not the Son. The Son is not the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is not the Father. They're not the same person. Whereas when Krishna was hiding from the gopis, when he left the rasa dance to increase their bhakti, and then they saw Narayan there. It's so funny because all the yogis, for forever trying to get a glimpse of Narayan, and the gopis just asking for directions. It's like you see someone on the street and said, how do I get to Main Street? So it's the gopis' only interest in Narayan was to ask for directions. And so the gopis were just looking at him and like, who are you really? And when they look, and Krishna couldn't hold his Narayan form. It was he couldn't hold it because so he just changed back into Krishna. So it's the same person. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna in chapter 11, at the end of chapter 11, says to Krishna, please let me see your four-handed form. It's not that Krishna says, okay, let me call Narayan. He's around here somewhere. It's the same person. It's right in the Gita where Krishna changes into his four-handed form, his universal form. So there's only one person who is God, Advaitam, Achyutam, Anadim, Ananta Rupam. Endless, literally endless forms, but one person, Advaita, Ananta Rupa, infinite forms, but Advaita. Whereas in the Trinity doctrine, they're different people.
So the modern evangelical understanding obviously is different than the original Trinity doctrine, because their understanding is that Jesus is God.
No, that is the Trinity doctrine. There are seven, according to Augustine, there are 7 principles of the Trinity doctrine. The Father is God. The Son is God. The Holy Spirit is God. The Father is not the Son. The Son is not the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is not the Father. And number 7, God is one. But it is an explicit teaching of the Trinity doctrine that there are 3 different persons. It's explicit. Hey,
Hey,
how's the phone? Oh yeah, we're having trouble with our phone line. That's an old joke.
it's all fixed.
My sister and old friend, Tiksha. I call it AT&T. So so that's an explicit point, is that they're not the same person. So if you say here are 3 people, they're not the same persons, but they're all God, to me, that's polytheism. And you can try to clean it up at the end by saying God is one, but philosophically, you're not really going anywhere. I mean, basically, at that point, you suspend philosophy. So if you achieve God as one by suspending philosophy, then ultimately you have a view which is not philosophical. Yes.
So would we say in our tradition that Krishna plays as Balaram, but he's not? But there's
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, it's right there in the Brahma Samhita. God is one, Advaitam. There are not 2 gods. I personally am strongly committed to monotheism, and I have no intention of becoming a polytheist.
But just to further your point, Prabhu, but Balaram and Krishna are, I mean, it's Krishna's brother. So, but
Krishna plays as his own brother.
I see.
Krishna plays as his own. I mean, in the Brahma Vimohana Leela, where Krishna bewildered Brahma, Krishna played as all the cowherd boys. Krishna can play as his own son. He can take many roles. It's like if someone's an accomplished actor, they can play any part. But there's one God. Krishna says, I am the source of everything. Krishna doesn't say, yeah, we have a committee here. It's me, it's Balaram, it's a few Vishnu forms, and we are the source of everything. When does Krishna say we are the source of everything? When does Krishna say, okay, I'm God, and I've been teaching you Arjuna. I'd like to bring on now, as a special guest, Balaram, who's also God. I mean, and he's gonna, he's a very good friend of me. He's my brother, and so he's gonna give you some other instructions. So yes, when Krishna plays different roles, he does it so well. But yeah, I am a person. Yeah, Vaishnavism is monotheistic. It's not a polytheistic tradition where there are many gods. If there are many gods, there's no God. There's no one person who is God. You can say God is one, and that remains not philosophy, but a mystery. It's one of the great, it must remain a mystery because it's simply contradictory. It's a direct contradiction. The Father is not the Son. The Son is not the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is not the Father. God is one.
So when we
Good
talk
luck
about
with
the, so it's like you have the quadruple expansion. So this Krishna is expanding, but it's all Krishna.
Of course.
Right.
In fact, that's for various reasons, one of the reasons that Islam spread so powerfully, one reason was because,
One God.
they killed a lot of people. Yeah, but they also, they accused Christianity of having abandoned monotheism. And a lot of people believed that. In fact, half the Christian world believed that. Because if you look at the 300s, the fourth century, there was this powerful movement which literally controlled half of Christianity, and which often it was called Arianism, because there was an Italian priest called Arius, and so it controlled half of, and there were times when the Roman emperors were Arian. So it wasn't like some schismatic, just some little, what do they call it, heresy. At some points, it was the dominant understanding of Christianity in the whole Roman Empire. And that is that, yeah, Jesus was great and maybe even created the world like Brahma or something, but he's not God. There's only one God. And actually, there was a time when most of the scholars or the greatest theologians in Christianity taught that also. And then gradually, and it went on for a whole century, they were debating it. And then, because of various historical reasons, which included violence and intimidation, gradually Christianity became Trinitarian. But when at the Council of Nicaea, when they first introduced this idea, and ultimately Constantine, a non-theologian, had the final word, but a lot of the greatest scholars of Christianity within the church said that's not our philosophy. And it's interesting because if you look at the history of Christianity, it started out as a Jewish movement. When it was a Jewish movement, no one, including Jesus, including his apostles, no one said that Jesus was God. Because a Jewish follower would never say that. And Jesus, being Jewish, would never say that. You only get it in the book of John, which from the time it was first published, everyone knew that's not really historically that accurate. And that's a whole other story why everyone knew the book of John had actually changed a lot of the known history found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because it wanted to promote this doctrine of Jesus in the beginning was the logos, the word, and so on. And so so as long as it was really a Jewish one, but then because Jesus, anyway, I've explained it so many times, because Jesus actually died on the cross or survived in the cross and went to either Glastonbury or Kashmir or somewhere. But anyway, let's say Jesus died on the cross, and then and so that proved he wasn't Messiah, because the word Messiah was a political and military term, as much or more than it was a religious term. The original Messiah, because Messiah means the anointed one. The anointed one in Israel was the king, not the priest. And so the Messiah was the person that saved Israel from foreign domination. So the first great Messiah was David, who defeated the Philistines. Judas Maccabee of the Hanukkah story was a Messiah. Cyrus, who wasn't even Jewish, Cyrus the Great, who sort of created the great Persian Empire, he defeated Babylonia, freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity, sent them back to Israel, gave them a donation to rebuild their temple. So Cyrus is called a Messiah in the Old Testament. So whenever the Jews were oppressed by foreign power, they looked for a Messiah. and because the Jews were under Roman rule. In fact, they had Herod the Great, who was, he was local there, he was Israeli, and he was ruling. People didn't like it, but then when he died, his sons were quarreling. So Rome reclassified Israel, and they sent a direct Roman governor because they couldn't rule themselves. So therefore, they sent a Roman governor, and the Jews were going crazy because there was a Roman governor in Israel. And of course, the Roman governor was Pontius Pilate. So they'll get it. Because they were trying to get rid of the Romans, they were looking for a Messiah. They weren't looking for a religious leader; they were looking for a military leader. But there's a whole story behind it. But so what happened was when Jesus was crucified, that convinced everyone that he wasn't the Messiah. But then Paul started, converting pagans. The pagans took over the Jesus movement. There was a complete Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, have a seat. There was a complete and rapid demographic shift. A movement which had been composed only of Jews became a movement composed almost exclusively of pagans, and the pagans made themselves comfortable and introduced all kinds of pagan philosophy into it. And you get polytheism, you get Jesus becoming God, because in the pagan world, if you had a great leader, he had to become God when he died. So, for example, when Julius Caesar was killed, he was certified as a god. And people used to put little pictures of Julius Caesar and little Mortys on their altars. When Augustus Caesar died, he became a god. And so that was normal pagan. If you had a leader who wasn't God or didn't become a god, then he wasn't a real leader. So under the pagan influence, Jesus is upgraded to God. But anyway, I'll stop there. But there's there's a whole history behind it, and how the theology came out the way it did. But I'll stop there.
You got it.
So thank you all very much.